Over the past few years, but I think especially the past few months, I found myself wondering, has the world always been this crazy? I mean, maybe not, but it sure feels like it. Just looking at everything that's going on around us, it just seems like everything's crazier than it's ever been before. We're coming out of a global pandemic. And I say coming out of it, it's still very much with us, and it's still very much shaping our lives at the moment and the way that we go about things. Even if we're not seeing as many hospitalizations and lockdowns and things have been eased, it's still very much with us. The war in Ukraine, like we were praying for earlier, it still rages on. It's still causing ridiculous amounts of suffering for so many people. And that's had knock-on effects for the rest of the world, apart from the fact that we've seen people fleeing Ukraine to try and find refuge in other countries. It's just had a knock-on on the global economy. Fuel prices have been going up. That's everywhere. I've been following it a little bit as it's been playing out in the UK, which is also coupled with some bad leadership, and just the cost of living is just going up and up and up. Currently, the Prime Minister of the UK, his job's up for question because of a string of parties that happened in 2020 when the rest of the country was in lockdown. There were the leadership of the country partying it up. And speaking of the United Kingdom, it's not looking like it's going to stay united for a whole lot longer. Although nothing's sure, there is talk among political parties in Northern Ireland and in Scotland of actually breaking away from the UK, mainly in light of some of the complications that have happened with Brexit and with leaving the EU and what that means for trade and a whole lot of other things. It's just a big mess at the moment, and it looks like the possibility is there that these nations could split off, and we won't really have much of a united kingdom anymore. Over the pond, things aren't exactly going swimmingly in America. This past week we had yet another mass shooting. And that's not long after another one that happened just a couple of weeks ago. And that brings us up to 214 mass shootings this year. On our own soil, we've had the disastrous floods in Durban. We think that maybe ESCOM could have gotten their act together, but last week we were almost switched off in our service. We're also feeling the effects of rising fuel prices. We could go on and on and on. All of this is just this year, apart from COVID, which is sort of lingering over us since, I guess, late 2019, early 2020. Was the world always this crazy? So like I said, this week and next week we're going to be spending some time in Ecclesiastes. You might have heard Ecclesiastes spoken about as the wisdom literature of the Bible, along with Proverbs and Job. In the last little while, that label has sort of fallen out of favor. Ecclesiastes does have a lot of things to say about wisdom. We'll see more of that next week. But it also has things to say about wealth, possessions, time, justice, and what God might be doing in all of this when things seem not to be working as they should. And Ecclesiastes was more than likely written at a time where, to the writer of this book, that wasn't entirely clear. It wasn't entirely clear what God was doing. Although we can't be absolutely certain, there's a good case to be made for Ecclesiastes being written sometime in the 3rd century BCE. Just as an aside, you might have heard that Ecclesiastes, along with Proverbs and Song of Songs, was written by King Solomon. I think we can be pretty certain that that's not the case, but we'll talk a bit more about that next week. That said, like Rolt mentioned earlier, Solomon is very much called to mind, particularly in the first few chapters, but possibly through the whole book. It seems like the writer is writing in the 3rd century BCE to his contemporaries, but impersonating Solomon to make his point. Calling on the experiences that we would associate with Solomon to say, well, who would be most qualified to speak into this situation? But again, we'll speak more to that next week. Thinking about the time period that we're in the years leading up, Alexander the Great had conquered pretty much that whole region, bringing it all under Greek rule. There was a it was a whole process of Greekifying that whole region, which is why our New Testaments are written in Greek. Alexander did such a good job Greekifying everything that people wanted to follow suit in a bunch of cases. The problem was that when Alexander died, he didn't really make it clear who was meant to take over from him. So we've got this massive empire. He's done an incredible job of bringing it under his control, but then who takes over? So immediately what happens is all of his sons are like, well, it's mine. And so they start fighting with each other, and then land grabs and power grabs. And that would carry on going right up until when the Romans swept in as the next superpower, just in time for the New Testament events to start happening. And caught right in the middle of some of those power grabs and some of those land grabs was Jerusalem. You had the Seleucid kingdom up in the north. You had the Ptolemaic kingdom down in the south. And Jerusalem was caught right there in the crossfire as they were vying for power. So are we living in an especially crazy time? Well, I think there's a sense in which the writer of Ecclesiastes would have looked at what was going on around him, would have felt the crazy, would have felt the cost of living crisis that he would have been going through, would have seen the political mess that was going on and thought, well, there's nothing new under the sun. Sure, we might have introduced a few new elements here and there, but really there's nothing new under the sun. And so looking at that situation, looking at what was unfolding in his time, the way that he describes it is with the word Hevel. So we're going to be thinking this morning about the context of Ecclesiastes, of Hevel and hopelessness. And we're going to begin with the idea that everything is Hevel. Now, what on earth is Hevel? Hevel is actually a Hebrew word. It's what the writer of Ecclesiastes uses to describe everything. So, chapter 1, verse 2. Hevel, said the teacher. Everything is Hevel. Literally, it means breath or vapor or mist or smoke, something like that. But quite often it's used metaphorically in the Old Testament to mean transient or powerless or illusory, trivial, insubstantial, futile. The NIV has meaningless, which is what we read earlier. The ESV, along with some of the older translations, has vanity, as in something that is done in vain, not somebody who is vain. The CSB has futility. Scholars have put forward a whole lot of different arguments for one of these, a combination of these, or none of these, going with something else altogether. There's virtually no agreement what this word means. We have a general idea, but working out how to exactly pin this down, nobody can really agree. So good job. We're 2 verses in and already we've been stumped by a word. But it isn't like we have nothing to go on. Whichever of these we choose, I think what we need to do is to come round to this idea of smoke or vapor, breath. Whether we go with meaningless futility, something that's transitory, whatever, that's the thing that it's a metaphor of. That's what we should try use to make sense of it. Breath, vapor, smoke, mist. You try grab it, and it escapes. 1 verse 14, it's put together with another image. The teacher sees all the things that humankind is given to do. It's all Hevel and a chasing after the wind. Put these ideas together, and I think a good case can be made for Hevel being something like ungraspable or elusive. Everything is like smoke. It's ungraspable. It's elusive. Try grab it, and it's gone. The rest of chapter 1 and chapter 2, which we'll look at in a little bit more detail next week, talk basically about the pursuit of happiness and how the teacher uses wisdom to investigate the different pursuits of humanity. Ultimately, he finds that for various reasons, they all come up wanting. It's all Hevel, like pursuing the wind. It's ungraspable. It's elusive. We can do all the things. We can acquire all the stuff. But in the end, we can't hold on to it. The benefit it offers is only temporary. And in any case, it could very well be left to somebody else who is just going to squander it. Chapter 3, which we'll look at in more detail in about a month's time, the teacher talks about how there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the skies. And God is in control of all of it, but, verse 11, no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. He knows that God is in control, but what God is doing, what God is up to for the teacher is entirely unclear. Humans die, animals die, and then what? We don't know. It's ungraspable. It's elusive. It's heavy. Chapter 4, I observed all the oppression that takes place under the sun, and I saw the tears of the oppressed, with no one to comfort them. Their oppressors have great power, and their victims are helpless. But they don't stop there. Verse 4, I observed that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbors. But this too is Hevel, a pursuit of the wind. They don't need more, but they keep working. And for what? Chapter 2, for something they can't even hold on to, or something that will be left to somebody else. Along similar lines, 5 verse 10, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. It's Hevel. It's ungraspable. It's elusive. Chapter 7, it's a reversal of fates. Verse 15, I've seen both of these things in my days of Hevel. The righteous perishing in their righteousness, and the wicked living long in their wickedness. There's a disconnect between what we expect to happen and what actually happens. And it's horribly disorienting. It's Hevel. It's ungraspable. It's elusive. I remember not too long after I got my driver's license, I was driving home from town. My band had been playing a show there, and there was this fog that set in, and I could hardly see 10 meters in front of me. Every car on the road had their lights, their brights on, their hazards on, and just slowed right down to we were going down the M3, and everybody was just going 60 k's an hour to just make sure that they didn't go into somebody. Every now and again, you'd have some idiot who'd just go right past and just can't see what's going on here. Maybe be a bit more careful. It was horribly disorienting, and especially for a new driver. I'd only been driving for maybe a couple months. It was horribly disorienting. That, I think, is a perspective that the teacher in Ecclesiastes seems to be pointing at. The teacher points at all the brokenness around him, which has a lot in common with the brokenness that we see around ourselves, even in our own lives. And he says, try to grab hold of that and tell me what's going on. And we'll try, and we'll find that we can't. It's Hevel. It's a pursuit of the wind. And when we read all these things against the backdrop of what was going on at the time for the writer of Ecclesiastes, I think we can see why he would say so. So let's look secondly. Everything seems hopeless. As we saw earlier, we have the Seleucids up in the north. We've got the Ptolemies down in the south. And as they fought it out for who had the rightful claim to the land, Jerusalem's there caught right in the crossfire. At the time, Jerusalem was under Ptolemaic rule, so currently the south seemed to be winning. But they were on the decline. By this time, 3 wars had already been fought with the Seleucids. A fourth was very near on the horizon, or perhaps had already started. Fighting is expensive business. Fighting is expensive business. So heavy taxes were being laid on them. And none of this was helped by the growing list of defeats that the Ptolemies were facing and a whole lot of internal revolts. In general, morale would have been low in the region as everyone pretty much saw the writing on the walls. One scholar explains, with the decline of Ptolemaic power, the Jewish community of Judah, centered in Jerusalem, experienced the imminent trauma of transition to a new political power. They experienced the imminent trauma of transition to a new political power. Now, we don't have the Ptolemies or the Seleucids to worry about, but when we look around, it becomes very apparent that there's nothing new under the sun. Whether it's the knock-on effects of war in Ukraine or just questionable leadership, whether that's here, UK, USA, and a whole lot of other places too, we're faced with the same issues. The greatest of plans amounting to Not much. Justice subverted and oppression perpetuated. In many ways built into the fabric of how our world works. And the teacher looks at it in his day, and we turn the news on and we see it in our day, and we come to the same conclusion. It's Hevel. God is in control. But it's not at all clear what it is that he's doing. It's ungraspable. It's elusive. Like chasing after the wind. And maybe that's how you're feeling this morning. Maybe what Ecclesiastes has to say is resonating with you in a way that doesn't make you feel altogether comfortable. Maybe it's been an especially crazy time for you, and you have no idea where God is taking you. I must confess, that's how I felt a lot this year. We felt like we've had an entire year just squeezed into a few months with the abrupt arrival of our daughter to not knowing what our future holds, just all sorts of things going on. And it's very easy for us to be in these moments and to feel like, God, I know you're in control, but I have no idea what you're doing. But fortunately, it isn't all bad news. Not for the teacher. Not for us. Everything is not as it seems. And that's where I want to end this morning. Everything is not as it seems. The teacher begins by proclaiming that everything is utterly Hevel. He ends by saying that everything is utterly Hevel. But that isn't where the book ends. Look with me at Ecclesiastes 12, verse 9. Not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. The words of the wise are like goads, basically a pointy stick that shepherds use to poke their sheep, get them into line. Their collected sayings are like firmly embedded nails given by one shepherd. So what the teacher has to say is not guaranteed to be easy to hear. In fact, a bit of perspective on the world, and they're guaranteed not to be easy to hear. It's a heavy dose of realism that Ecclesiastes gives us. But he goes on. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of humanity. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. And although the teacher throughout the book is puzzled, is confused, is possibly even exasperated at the fact that whatever God is doing in the world is not at all clear. And let's be honest, at some other time, we're bound to find ourselves in that same position, where he never doubts that God is in control, but is absolutely confused as to what he might be doing. These last verses of the book are a great comfort. He will bring every deed into judgment. He'll make every wrong right. The injustice that we see in the world, he's going to deal with it. And on the cross, we see how. On the cross, all our sin was laid upon the one who knew no sin. All our brokenness, all our shame. But in his resurrection, he rose to new life and promises to take us with him. And by the Spirit of God, he is breathing new life into creation. We just have to wait for it. We just have to hold on. He's making all things new. So where does this leave us? Ecclesiastes 12:13. Fear God and keep his commandments. The cross shows us that in the midst of our sadness, in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our brokenness, God will not let us go. The cross shows us that while everything around us might be Hevel, while everything around us is ungraspable, elusive, Jesus will hold you tight and he'll never let you go. If only you'll trust him. Only you'll hold on to him.